I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom, holding a letter that could change my brother's life forever. The same brother who, without a moment's hesitation, sold my dog Rusty when I was away at college. 20 years had passed since that day, but some betrayals cut too deep to heal on their own. The judge called my name. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you have something to share with the court regarding the custody case of your niece, Emma?" My brother's eyes widened across the room. He hadn't expected me to show up. We hadn't spoken in years, not since our mother's funeral, where he'd tried to act like selling my dog was just some childhood prank, rather than the moment that shattered our relationship forever. I clutched the envelope containing every painful truth I'd kept silent about for decades. Things our family had buried beneath forced smiles at Thanksgiving dinners and awkward Christmas gatherings in our small Pennsylvania town. Things that the judge needed to hear before deciding if my brother deserved custody of his 7-year-old daughter. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have a letter about my brother that I believe is relevant to these proceedings." Growing up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the Mitchell family looked picture perfect from the outside. Dad worked at the steel mill before it closed down in the 90s. Mom taught 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary, and we lived in a modest colonial with a white picket fence that Dad repainted every spring without fail. My brother, Jake, was 3 years older, the golden child, quarterback, honor roll, and could charm the socks off anyone's grandmother at the church potluck. I was the quiet one. While Jake commanded attention at Friday night football games, I spent weekends volunteering at the Lehigh Valley Animal Shelter. That's where I found Rusty, a copper-colored mutt with one ear that flopped and another that stood straight up. The shelter manager said he'd been abandoned on the highway. Something in his cautious brown eyes spoke to me. We were both a little broken, a little wary. Mom was hesitant, but Dad said it would teach me responsibility. For once, I had something that was entirely mine. Jake resented the attention Rusty got. At family BBQs, relatives who used to fuss over Jake's latest touchdown would stop to pet Rusty or ask me about him. One 4th of July, when I was 15, Jake accidentally left the gate open. Rusty was gone for 3 terrifying days. When Mrs. Callahan from 2 streets over finally brought him home, Jake acted relieved, but I caught the disappointment in his eyes. "Dogs like that always run away eventually," he said when no one else could hear. "You shouldn't get so attached." During my senior year, our relationship seemed to improve. Jake was home from Penn State for summer break and suddenly wanted to bond. He helped me with college applications, even drove me to my orientation at Pittsburgh University. When I hesitated about leaving Rusty, Jake insisted he'd take good care of him. "I've matured, Ellie," he said. "Consider it my way of making up for being a jerk." I believed him. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks into my freshman year, Mom called. Her voice was careful, measured. "Honey, there's something you need to know about Rusty." She explained that Jake had sold Rusty to a family moving to Oregon. He'd pocketed $500 and used it for a spring break trip to Cancun with his friends. By the time Mom and Dad found out, the family was gone. No contact information, no way to track them down. I came home that weekend, confronted Jake in our parents' living room. He shrugged, said Rusty was just a dog, and that I needed to grow up. Dad looked disappointed, but said nothing. Mom tried to mediate, suggesting we work through this as a family. But some betrayals can't be worked through. I returned to college, changed my major to pre-law, and limited my visits home to holidays. I maintained a polite facade with Jake, but the trust was irrevocably broken. Even after he seemed to straighten out, good job at an insurance firm, marriage to Melissa, their daughter Emma, I kept my distance. Then came Mom's grand gesture on her deathbed 5 years ago. She revealed she'd hired a private investigator years before and had tracked down Rusty. She handed me a worn manila envelope with photos of Rusty, looking older but well cared for, playing with children in a backyard with mountains in the background. "I wanted to tell you sooner," she whispered, but Jake made me promise not to. She squeezed my hand. "There's more in there, something about Jake you need to know." But before she could elaborate, Jake entered the hospital room, and Mom never finished telling me her secret. She passed away the next morning, leaving me with an envelope of photos and unanswered questions. Last spring, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Melissa, Jake's now ex-wife. We'd never been close. I'd only seen her at obligatory family gatherings before they divorced 2 years ago. "Ellie, I wouldn't call if it wasn't important," she said, her voice tight. "Jake is filing for full custody of Emma. The hearing is next month." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, trying to keep the edge from my voice. I'd built a good life in Pittsburgh, made partner at my law firm, bought a Victorian fixer-upper, even started dating Sam, a kind veterinarian who never pushed me to talk about my family. "Because he's lying about everything," Melissa said. "He claims I'm unstable, that I'm an unfit mother. He's manipulating the system just like he's manipulated everyone his whole life." I nearly hung up. This wasn't my battle. But then Melissa said something that froze me in place. "Emma has a dog, a rescue named Charlie. Jake's threatening to get rid of it if he gets custody, says it's too much responsibility alongside raising a child." My free hand curled into a fist. "That's not enough for me to get involved, Melissa." "There's more," she said. "Remember those photos of Rusty your mom gave you? Jake told me once, when he was drunk, what really happened." After that call, I couldn't sleep. I kept returning to Mom's envelope, studying the photos of Rusty I'd looked at 100 times before. But this time, I examined the papers beneath them, bank statements, emails, a notarized letter. Mom had left me the truth, but I'd been too grief-stricken to see it. 3 weeks later, I found myself driving to Allentown for Emma's 7th birthday party. Jake had invited me, surprising us both, insisting it would mean the world to Emma to have her aunt there. The custody hearing was the following week, and I suspected this invitation was less about Emma and more about presenting himself as a family man who could reconcile with his estranged sister. The party was at Jake's new house, a McMansion in a development where all the homes looked identical. Bounce house in the yard, catered food, personalized goodie bags for the kids. Jake played the perfect dad, taking photos with Emma, leading the kids in games, charming the other parents. I sat on the deck with Melissa, who'd been invited for Emma's sake. "He's pulling out all the stops," she murmured, watching Jake organize a scavenger hunt. "You should see him in mediation. Talks about my anger issues and my instability like he's concerned, not vindictive." Emma ran over, her dark curls bouncing, Charlie the dog trailing behind her. She was shy but sweet, showing me her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear with one eye missing. "Daddy says I have to leave Charlie with Mommy if I want to live with him," she confided, her small face serious. "He says dogs are too messy." Jake appeared, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Hey, kiddo, why don't you go help the other kids find the last treasure? I need to talk to Aunt Ellie." Once Emma was out of earshot, Jake's smile remained, but his eyes turned cold. "I appreciate you coming, but don't interfere with my family." "Family means something different to you than it does to me," I replied evenly. "Ancient history, Ellie. I was a kid when that dog thing happened. Let it go already." "Is that what you told Mom when she found Rusty?" I asked quietly. His smile faltered. "Mom was sentimental. She should have minded her own business." "Like you're minding Melissa's now?" Jake stepped closer. "You don't know anything about my marriage or what kind of mother Melissa is." "I know you, Jake. That's enough." The party deteriorated after that. Jake kept throwing meaningful glances my way as he played the devoted father role with increasing theatricality. When it came time for cake, he gave a speech about family being everything that made several parents dab at their eyes. As guests began leaving, the skies opened up. a sudden summer thunderstorm that sent everyone scrambling. In the chaos, I found myself alone in Jake's home office, where I'd gone to retrieve my purse. A file cabinet drawer was slightly open. Inside was a folder labeled Custody Strategy. I hesitated only a moment before opening it. Inside were printouts of doctored text messages, edited photos of Melissa's house made to look cluttered and unsafe, and a notarized statement from a character witness, our father, claiming Melissa had anger management issues. The last page was a typed checklist. Item number 4 read, "If custody secured, rehome E's dog. Allergies excuse?" Lightning flashed outside as Jake appeared in the doorway. "Found something interesting?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "You haven't changed at all," I said, holding up the custody strategy folder. "Still manipulating, still lying, still willing to hurt an innocent animal to get what you want." Jake lunged forward, snatching the folder from my hands. "You have no right to go through my personal files. And you have no right to destroy your daughter's relationship with her mother or her dog." My voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Does Dad know you forged his signature on that statement?" Jake's face reddened. "Dad understands what's at stake. He's always had my back." "The way he had mine when you sold Rusty?" I challenged. "Mom may have been too afraid to stand up to you, but I'm not." The remaining party guests were huddled under the covered patio, waiting for the rain to ease. Jake gripped my arm, his fingers digging in. "Not another word," he hissed. "This is Emma's birthday." "Let go of me," I said, loud enough that heads turned our way. When he didn't, I raised my voice further. I said, "Let go." Jake released me, plastering on a smile for his audience. "Sorry, folks, sister squabble. You know how it is with family." But something had snapped inside me. 20 years of silence, of swallowing the truth to keep the peace, of watching Jake charm his way out of accountability. "No, I don't think they do know," I said, walking toward the group. "They don't know that you're planning to get rid of Emma's dog once you win custody, just like they don't know what you did to my dog when we were younger." The patio fell silent. Emma looked up from where she sat petting Charlie, confusion clouding her face. "Ellie," Jake warned, "not here." "Where then? In the courtroom next week?" "Because I'll be there, Jake, with everything Mom found out about Rusty." Melissa stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" I looked directly at Jake. "Tell them, or I will." Jake's charm evaporated, replaced by naked panic. "These are private family matters. Everyone needs to leave, now." But no one moved. The audience was captivated by the unfolding drama. "My brother sold my dog when I was in college," I said, my voice carrying across the patio. "He told our parents Rusty went to a good home, but that wasn't the whole truth. Mom hired an investigator years later and discovered Jake sold Rusty to a dogfighting ring in West Virginia." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emma's eyes widened in horror. "That's a lie," Jake sputtered, but his face had gone pale. I pulled out my phone, opening the scanned documents from Mom's envelope. The investigator found evidence that Jake knew exactly what he was doing. The family moving to Oregon was a cover story. He got $2,000, not $500. The man he sold Rusty to was arrested 3 months later for running dogfights. "Daddy," Emma's small voice cut through the tension, "is that true?" Jake knelt beside his daughter, his voice honey-sweet. "Of course not, Princess," and Ellie is confused. "I have the bank deposit slip, Jake," I said quietly. "I have the emails where you arranged the sale. Mom kept everything." One of the mothers gathered her child. "We should go," she murmured, others quickly following suit. Melissa moved to Emma's side, pulling her close as Jake stood, his face contorted with rage. "You've always been jealous," he spat, "always trying to make me look bad." "No," I replied calmly, "I've always been silent." That ends today. I turned to the remaining guests. I apologize for ruining the party, but Emma deserves to grow up in a home where she's safe, where her pets are safe, and where the truth matters. I walked to Emma, kneeling to her eye level. I'm sorry you had to hear this today, but I promise you, Charlie will be okay. And so will you. As I walked toward my car in the rain, I heard Jake behind me, his voice breaking. Ellie, you can't do this. You can't tell the judge. I didn't turn around. For the first time in 20 years, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The truth was finally out, and nothing Jake could say would change that. The week between Emma's birthday party and the custody hearing unfolded like a Category 5 hurricane. Jake called incessantly, cycling between threats, pleas, and promises to change. Dad showed up at my hotel room, his face aged a decade since I'd last seen him. You don't understand what you've done, he said, shoulders slumped in the doorway. Jake's life will be ruined. Jake ruined his own life, I replied, and he almost ruined Emma's too. Dad shook his head. We protected you from knowing the worst of it. Jake has problems, has since he was a teenager. Problems don't excuse cruelty, Dad. They explain it, maybe, but they don't excuse it. For the first time, my father looked at me, really looked at me, with something like respect in his eyes. You sound like your mother, he said finally. She wanted to tell you everything before she died. I convinced her not to burden you. It wasn't your decision to make, I said, either of you. Before leaving, Dad handed me a worn leather journal. Your mom's. She kept track of everything, the investigation, her conversations with the family that eventually rescued Rusty from that awful place. That night, I read Mom's journal cover to cover. The truth was even worse than I'd thought. Jake hadn't just sold Rusty on impulse. He'd planned it for weeks, researching where he could get the most money. Mom had discovered this 3 years after it happened, when she overheard Jake bragging to a friend during Thanksgiving break. That night, I read Mom's journal cover to cover. The truth was even worse than I'd thought. Jake hadn't just sold Rusty on impulse, he'd planned it for weeks, researching where he could get the most money. Mom had discovered this 3 years after it happened, when she overheard Jake bragging to a friend during Thanksgiving break. She'd spent thousands hiring an investigator who eventually tracked Rusty to a raid on a fighting operation. Miraculously, Rusty had survived, though badly scarred. The investigator found him at a rehabilitation sanctuary for fighting dogs in Oregon. The Family in Oregon story had been Jake's cover, a grain of truth in a mountain of lies. Mom had visited Rusty secretly, multiple times. The photos she'd given me were from those visits. She'd wanted to tell me, but Jake had threatened to cut her off from Emma if she did. Mom, already battling cancer, couldn't bear to lose her only grandchild. The morning of the hearing, I received a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3, before court. Important. It was Melissa. She was waiting beside her car, holding a USB drive. Security footage from our home, she explained. Jake doesn't know I kept the system running after he moved out. It shows him planting evidence, messing up the house before child services visits, coaching Emma on what to say. The timestamps match perfectly with the surprise inspections he arranged. Inside the courthouse, Jake was all polish and poise in an expensive suit, flanked by 2 attorneys. He avoided my eyes as the judge entered. The proceedings began routinely enough, Jake's attorney painting Melissa as unstable and neglectful, presenting Dad's statement about her concerning behavior. When they finished, the judge turned to Melissa's attorney, who requested permission to play the security footage. The courtroom watched in silence as the videos showed the truth. Jake systematically creating the very conditions he accused Melissa of maintaining. The judge's expression darkened with each new clip. Your Honor, Jake's attorney stammered, these videos could have been doctored. We request time to have them analyzed. "The court will certainly verify their authenticity," the judge replied. "But given their content, I'm inclined to order a full investigation into Mr. Mitchell's claims." That's when the judge called my name. I approached the stand with Mom's journal and the envelope of evidence. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you have something relevant to these proceedings." I nodded, placing the materials before her. "Your Honor, I have documentation of a pattern of behavior that speaks directly to my brother's character and truthfulness. It begins 20 years ago but continues to the present day. As I testified about Rusty, about the dogfighting ring, about Jake's calculated plan to dispose of Emma's dog, the courtroom fell so silent I could hear the wall clock ticking. Jake stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. When I finished, the judge reviewed Mom's journal in silence. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Mitchell, these are extremely serious allegations that, if true, speak not only to your credibility, but to deep concerns about your judgment and character. This court will be ordering a complete psychological evaluation before proceeding further." She turned to Melissa. "In the interim, primary physical custody will remain with Miss Mitchell, with supervised visitation for the father pending the outcome of our investigation." Outside the courtroom, Melissa hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For Emma, for Charlie, for Rusty," I replied. 3 months later, I found myself on a flight to Portland, Oregon. Mom's journal had contained the sanctuary's information, still operational after all these years. I'd called ahead, learning that Rusty had indeed lived there until his peaceful passing 5 years earlier at the age of 15. "He was a special one," the sanctuary director told me as we walked among the rescued dogs. "Never lost his gentleness, despite everything. We have his memorial stone in our remembrance garden." She led me to a sunlit corner where stone markers honored dogs who'd found safety there. Rusty's read simply, "Beloved friend, survivor, teacher of forgiveness." Beside it was a fresh planting, a young dogwood tree with a small plaque, "In memory of Caroline Mitchell, who never stopped searching." "Your mother visited every year," the director explained. "She funded our rehabilitation program for the most traumatized cases. We call it Rusty's Second Chance." I knelt beside the stone, overcome. Mom had created something beautiful from our family's darkest chapter, without any of us knowing. Back in Pennsylvania, changes continued. Jake entered intensive therapy as part of the court's requirements. Dad sold the family home and moved to Arizona, sending occasional awkward but genuine emails. Melissa and Emma settled into a new routine, with Charlie the dog an inseparable part of their family. And I found myself with an unexpected new family member, a 3-legged pit bull from Rusty's Second Chance program. The sanctuary had called about a special case, an older dog named Phoenix who needed a quiet home for his final years. "He reminds us of Rusty," the director had said, "same wise eyes." Sam helped me welcome Phoenix into our home, patiently working through the dog's fear of men. Watching them gradually bond, I realized some wounds could heal, given enough time and love. One evening, I received a letter from Jake, his first communication since the hearing that wasn't filtered through attorneys. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote, "but I want you to know I'm finally facing what I did, to Rusty, to you, to everyone. The therapist says I've been running from shame my whole life, hurting others before they could hurt me. It's not an excuse, just the beginning of understanding." He closed with a donation receipt, a substantial contribution to Rusty's Second Chance program made in Mom's name. It wasn't redemption, but perhaps it was a start. As I sit here with Phoenix snoozing at my feet, I think about the long, winding path that led me to that courtroom with my brother's fate in my hands. I didn't set out for revenge. I simply couldn't let history repeat itself with Emma and Charlie. Jake and I aren't reconciled, Not really. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes. But Emma visits monthly, bringing Charlie along to play with Phoenix. She calls me Aunt Ellie who tells the truth, a title I wear with quiet pride. The truth isn't always easy or clean. It rarely fits into neat boxes with happy endings for everyone involved. But I've learned that secrets fester, while truth, however painful, at least offers the possibility of healing. If there's a betrayal you've buried, a truth you've swallowed to keep the peace, ask yourself, what's the real cost of your silence? Sometimes the hardest letters to write are the ones that finally set us free. If you found meaning in my story, please subscribe for more real-life experiences. Share this video with someone who might need courage to speak their truth. And remember, even the most painful chapters can lead to unexpected new beginnings.